Okay, welcome everyone. With German precision, we start at 12 o'clock on the spot. Welcome to Food Safety Virtual Office Hours. Today's topic is on 11 reasons why Listeria is not going away in the food industry and how to address those. What will happen today is I will give a short presentation, and then we will have our panelists sort of chime in on either my presentation and the questions we will get. We got a chat. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during my presentations, and we'll cover them. I'm very excited about the panel we have. We got Sam Alkane, VP of Regulatory and Scientific Affairs of IDFA. Sanjay may or may not join us. I'm not sure whether he's here. With AFI, American Frozen Food Institute, Matt Henderson, VP of Technical Services for Land of Frost, Matt Ranieri, VP of Technical Services for Acme, and Tim Stubbs, Senior VP of Dairy Management, Inc. Many of the people here have been fighting the good fight against Listeria, so I'm actually really looking forward to hearing their opinions, their input on some of the questions we will get and we will discuss today. So with that, and as a warm-up, I'll start us out about what I think some of the top reasons why Listeria is not going away and why we continue to see challenges controlling Listeria throughout the food industry. And obviously this office hour and some of the content has been driven by some of the recent outbreaks we've seen. And this is not all inclusive, but we had one link to frozen supplemental shakes, so affecting the dairy industry, one link to liverwurst, so affecting the ready-to-eat meat industry, and one link to a plant-based refrigerated shelf life beverages in Canada. So really showing and continue to show that Listeria is what I call the equal opportunity pathogen. It will impact almost all parts of the food industry. I think it's very difficult to say other than dry foods that don't support growth that any products are really low risk. But any product that supports growth, and there are a lot of them, are a risk for Listeria. Even some of the ones who don't support growth, and we'll get into that a little bit. So what are these top reasons? And I think first, and a really important one, is that Listeria monocytogenes is a common foodborne pathogen. And what I mean was that it's an organism that's commonly found in natural environments. If you're in charge of a food processing facility, you have to expect that Listeria monocytogenes comes in, and probably not just once a year. Obviously, you will have GMPs, you will have hygienic zoning and other practices to reduce that, but Listeria will come into your facility. And that's problem number one. And when we say it's common, what do we mean? We found it to be found in 8% of samples from natural environments. And that's a study we did where we literally went out to state and national parks across the US, all the way from the east to the west, the north to the south, found it at 8% of samples. And that's Listeria monocytogenes, not all Listeria species. This is the one that causes human disease. Urban environments, we did this in New York, about 7.3% positive, so in the same ballpark. If you talk about samples from farms, which can be relevant if you have a facility located more in rural environments, often a higher prevalence. In some of these farms, environmental samples, we can find 20 to 30% of samples positive for Listeria monocytogenes. We're talking about Listeria species, so all of them, most of these environments, about 30%. So just illustrating how significant and substantial the risk is of Listeria introduction into a processing facility, which, of course, means that you have to assume it comes in, you have to make sure your practices in your plant eliminated at the end of the day. Number two, and I think some of the outbreaks we've seen, is foodborne disease surveillance is getting better. Companies, products may have had Listeria outbreaks linked to them 30 years ago, but no one would ever know. Today, we use whole genome sequencing. We have advanced methods for detection of outbreaks. And this illustrates this very well. So from 83 to 97, we essentially had an outbreak every 3 years. Today, we're talking more about anywhere from 5 to 8, maybe 5 to 10 outbreaks per year detected. So 20, 30 times more outbreaks detected than 30 years ago. substantial increase in outbreak detection. However, and that's really important, it's not just more outbreaks, we're detecting smaller outbreaks. The average size of an outbreak today is probably about 4 to 5 cases, while 30 years ago, you would not identify an outbreak unless it was 50 plus cases probably. So products that don't cause many cases, either because they're not widely distributed, they're contaminated at very low levels, will still be recognized as the source of an outbreak. Now, to further illustrate it, we just recently completed a study where we looked at Listeria isolates in New York, more than 1,000 human isolates over 21 years. And what we found is that we identified 85 clusters. So these are 2 or more human listeriosis cases caused by the same or closely related whole genome sequences of Listeria. So it's the same organism, essentially, for simplicity's sake. 67 of them, 80%, were clusters of 2 or 3 people that got sick. So as we build this database, and this is going to continue in the next few years, we're going to detect more and more outbreaks that are even smaller. Some of these are clusters of 2 that were 10, 12 years apart, but, for example, were in the same county. Clearly suggesting there's a common link. And that could be a food that's locally distributed or something else. So that trend of small outbreaks being detected and therefore impacting smaller companies or foods that we traditionally considered safe or extremely low risk will continue. So this is not going to change. That's what these data show us. Okay. 3 and 4, I'm going to lump it together, and it's about Listeria growth. Some foods may show more growth now than they used to. If you have products that are stored for longer time, you have longer shelf lives. Trend towards clean labels, remove of interventions, call it chemicals, call it growth inhibitors, they control Listeria growth, might contribute to more growth. The other one is that even if you have a product traditionally doesn't support growth, consumers, customers will come up with a way to use and abuse your food, so it does support growth. Textbook studies, of course, ice cream, Bluebell, outbreak Bluebells was linked to, which appears to pretty clear that it is linked to shakes, milkshakes that were made with that ice cream, probably stored at temperatures where there was growth, and that allowed Listeria to grow. But there are other examples, if you prepare sandwiches, if you were to have Listeria on the bread and not on the deli meat, but you make the sandwich with the deli meat, now you transfer the Listeria from your bread, from your bagel onto your deli meat, where it can grow. So these are scenarios that I think we're gonna see more. And it's very important for industry to understand what happens to your product when it's used, not just what do you think people should do with your product. And these are some of the key lessons learned relevant to that. A bunch of them already mentioned. Caramel apples was another example of a product where you take a product, people say, why would it grow on apples? It probably doesn't, but as soon as you make a caramel apple, sticker wouldn't stick in it, coated with caramel, Listeria can grow. So it's not safe anymore to say, well, our product is not a likely vehicle that causes a listeriosis outbreak. We need to say, what could happen to our product that would make it into a vehicle? What might people do? So understanding the end use, super important. Immunocompromised populations susceptible to Listeria will increase. And this is probably for today one of the key take-home messages. And to me, something that I see in common between the outbreak linked to liverwurst, the outbreak linked to shakes that were sold in long-term care facilities. Both of them, essentially serve to consumers that are immunocompromised or highly susceptible. I get flack when I say it, but if you look at the typical consumers of liverwurst and the outbreak confirmed that they tend to be much on the older side, probably more immunocompromised, so higher risk. Obviously, if you have shakes that are sold into long-term care facilities, you're reaching a highly immunocompromised population. If you know that your ice creams are used to make shakes that are served in hospitals, it reaches highly immunocompromised people. So anyone who has anything to do with food safety in a company, I encourage you today to figure out, are there any of your products that disproportionately go into supply chains, into distributions that will target immunocompromised and highly susceptible populations? Sometimes you know it because your product is labeled for that. Milkshakes that go into long-term care facilities. Sometimes common sense will tell you liverwurst, other product. Sometimes you may have to talk to your salespeople saying, hey, out of our SKUs, is there any product that we sell in the specific supply chains, maybe to hospitals, maybe to long-term care facility? What SKUs are those? And then those are your high-risk SKUs, and you might have to, do more environmental monitoring, enhance your protection of those lines to produce those products, because that's something we've seen in a number of the recent outbreaks. I think it's very, very important. And immunocompromised people can be about 100 times or so more susceptible. So your risk substantially increases if you take the same product and now move it towards consumers that are highly immunocompromised. I think that's an action item I think people should take really right now. Number 6, Listeria doesn't just come from processing plant environments. It is still, contamination in the processing plant environment is still important, but over the last few years, we've seen other sources. One textbook was a Listeria outbreak linked to packaged salads, where ultimately the issue was traced back to equipment used to harvest iceberg lettuce. So the harvesters, wasn't the processing facility. Outbreak linked to ice cream was linked to ice cream machines at a restaurant that were not cleaned correctly. So sources at retail, sources after it leaves the processing facilities. Sometimes Listeria might be introduced there. Sometimes it might just be multiplied. Retail in general, it could be ice cream in restaurant, it could be deli meats or cheese in retail, important sources. So it is not limited to the processing plants. And some of the issue we've seen came from, outside the processing plant as a source. A really important one is finding Listeria, identifying those niches, identifying Listeria problems can be difficult. And I want to illustrate this by this slide here, which shows 7 plants that we worked. These were actually cheese plants. We essentially trained them to do environmental monitoring, and they found a certain % of Listeria positives over 1 year monitoring. And you can see a wide range from the eerily good facilities that have no positive out of 334 samples, or 1 out of 222, to the facilities that seem to have fairly high prevalence of like 23%, right? Of course, one could conclude, well, the facilities have low Listeria detection rates are the ones that pose the lowest risk for finished product contamination. But that would rely on swabbing really being done correctly and it finding issues. So what we did is we went into those facilities and actually, sampled what I consider hard. And our team often gets criticized for cleaning the plants, not swabbing them, because the swabs tend to end up dirty and the surface we sample tends up to be cleaner than it was when we came in. But that is what vigorous sampling does. And so what we did is we sampled the same facilities, watched the routine sampling, maybe resampled some sites if we thought the technique wasn't right, maybe sampled other sites that the facilities did not sample. And here's what we found. Red obviously indicates challenging or problematic. And what you can see, 2 of the facilities had very low prevalence, like this one, 0 out of 334. We collected 50 samples, found 3 positive. 1 out of 106, we collected 50, about half of them found 7 positive. So these 2 facilities did not sample to find, most likely. Okay. Then we have the green facilities, they're doing a good job. We actually found less when we came in than they found. If you think about seek and destroy, this essentially means they were good at seeking it, they were good at finding it, and they're probably good at destroying the environment while Listeria can survive, because there's representative 1 year average. We came in at the end of the year, we found lower prevalence. So that's a good sign. Those are the facilities that are doing a good job, it appears to. And then there are the ones in black, which one could think of as facilities that are good at a seek, they're finding it, but they're not so good at the destroy part. They're not removing, controlling the niches where Listeria can survive, because we found essentially the same prevalence as they found. In particularly clear in facility E, where they found 11%, we found 10%. So when you rely on swabbing, particularly in facilities where you're not in, think again. It is really important to make sure people find Listeria, and it is not always easy. I'm sure some of those facilities that didn't find it thought they were doing a good job sampling, but they didn't. And if you don't find Listeria, you can't remediate it. And if you can't remediate it, then you're at an enhanced risk of an outbreak or a recall, and your problems continue. So finding Listeria, improving your ability to find Listeria is really, really important. And this illustrates one of the challenges, right? And I call it the 12 by 12 inch mentality. Yes, government documents, FDA and USDA say you have to sample 12 by 12 inches. And if you're in an environment like this, you know, where you should really sample is between the diamond plate and those tiles and that crack here, because that's difficult to clean. When you actually step on that diamond board, you see some liquid coming out in here, but that's not a 12 by 12 sample. That could be a 0.5 inch by 288 inches, which is also 144 square inches, but it's not 12 by 12. More than half the facilities I go in, they will sample 12 by 12, and typically they sample on the diamond board. That's why they don't find. Okay. So even a simple change to emphasizing that, you know, the surfaces don't need to be flat, they don't need to be 12 by 12, can be really, really important to help with that finding process. Reasons 8 and 9, I'm going to group them together again. You know, control and elimination of environmental Listeria sources is difficult and expensive. And root cause analysis are often lacking, also impeding your ability to control and eliminate environmental Listeria sources. Sometimes that knowledge that control and elimination is difficult and particularly is expensive may even motivate people to not find. What do I mean with that? If you know that if you find Listeria again on this floor for the 4th time in a row, then it probably means the floor needs to be replaced, and that probably costs $250,000 or $1 million, and a plant shut down for multiple days. Some people might know that might be pretty close to essentially taking a plant out of business, and therefore they're not super motivated to find it. That's the reality. And so this is important to tackle. This is important to understand that people might not always be encouraged to find the true root causes because of the cost and the difficulty of controlling environmental Listeria sources, particularly if it is within the infrastructure. So root cause analysis, and this is another action item from this. If you're in a facility, you have anything to do with Listeria control, work on improving your root cause analysis procedures and your continuous improvement strategies. Root cause analysis has broad benefits beyond food safety. You know, if you have people that know how to do root cause analysis, it will help with quality issues, productivity issues, it will help with all issues. Design your root cause analysis to drive short-term as well as long-term improvements. Develop SOPs, develop tools. Have an SOP for your root cause analysis. Have an agreed upon procedures and tools. And there are tools out there. We've developed some, other people developed some, which is a fishbone diagram that's already there, already designed to help you do a root cause analysis on a persistent Listeria issue. And by the way, if anyone wants the slides, I think Alex can send out a link, but put it in the chat, let us know. We will share those slides and share some of these documentations. So good root cause analysis is essential to reduce your risk. And the lack of good root cause analysis is one of the major issues why we continue to have Listeria problems. Here's some examples of some of the long-term changes that should be driven by root cause analysis and good environmental sampling. Improved sanitation, improved preventive maintenance program, improved sanitary equipment design, improved sanitary plant design. But you can see sanitary plant design, improved sanitary plant design is expensive. Often it's floors, often it's drain systems, but you have to be prepared to do that. Reason number 10 on my top 11 list, training is often lacking. And I don't mean with that necessarily that we don't do some training. I don't think we do the right training. Often the training is very technical in terms of here's how you sponge. You take the sponge, you swab this side, then you flip it over, then you swab the other way. And that's great. That's foundational. But what we really need to do is we need to move, in my mind, we need to move past technical training to coaching and education. The people that do the environmental sampling, they're out there and often they can be your first early warning system, not because they find a positive on a specific site, but because they see things that could help Listeria survive. I've been in a facility where I saw a whole section of the floor that was replaced, and when we walked across it, you could see water coming out on the boundaries between the new floor and the old floor. Floor wasn't installed right, water went in under it, stayed under it, completely unreachable by sanitizers, the perfect niche. It doesn't matter whether I find a positive or not in that spot, it needs to be fixed. All right. And what that means is if your sampler sees something like that, they see it and then that means they need to know that they own it. It needs to get fixed, and it is their job to assure it gets fixed. It's not enough to even report it. It's like they need to be that person who continuously say, hey, I talked about this a week ago. Where are we with this? Or those are the people that might see an overhead, pulley system that like, I've seen this forever, and I always sample the nice, clean underbelly of the HVAC right next to it, but no one ever samples that uncleanable pulley system right next to it that's overexposed foods. We got to do something about it. And that person got to be that squeaky wheel who makes sure that gets addressed. We need to empower people, and that needs to be part of the training, those responsibilities, and helping them find and see the things that can be Listeria risks. So I do think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, and it's not more hyper-technical training, how to flip the sponge over and how to make sure it's 12 by 12 inches. Sometimes that hyper-technical training could actually be more of an impediment. Last and final point is that I believe, and what I've seen, is that plants rely too much on testing, particularly sort of, environmental monitoring, where they don't find, and often it's because they don't sample right, or on finished product testing that shows negative results. And don't put enough thought into validation verification. I do believe many facilities and many people in facilities think environmental sampling is a control strategy. It's not. It is there to validate or verify, and it's really important for people to separate validation and verification. So what do I mean with that? Just to sort of level set. Validation, I'm going to define this as many people do, but some people use it interchangeably, as data. And you take a classic example, pasteurization. Classic definition of validation is data that show that you're doing the right thing. I can support that this time temperature reduces Listeria by 5 logs, or whatever my target is. Verification then is I can prove that every drip of milk that comes out of my facility went through that type of heat treatment. And for heat treatment, it's fairly easy to do validation and verification. Very often validation or data that's been around for decades or longer. You don't need to do a validation study necessary to know that 72 degrees centigrade for 15 seconds is enough. But you do need to do verification. However, when we talk about the key control strategies for Listeria, such as cleaning and sanitation, very few people actually have true validation data. But you can create those, and you should create those. Because right now, we're very often in the mood of doing sampling, that's sort of verification, but we actually don't know whether what we're verifying is actually valid and has been validated. We're verifying that we do this cleaning every day, but we actually have no real idea whether that would remove Listeria from our slicer, our filler, whatever piece of equipment it is. We just act on faith there. And that is one of the major challenges we see. So I give an example of how you could actually validate, for example, an SSOP for a piece of equipment. It doesn't have to be a new piece of equipment. It can be one that you have in your facility. And this is not something I invented, actually. John Butts, who worked with Matt at Land of Frost, called this seek and destroy. Seek and destroy is often misunderstood. I think many people think it's about seeking Listeria and destroying the Listeria. if you look at the literature, and Matt can disagree with me after this, it's actually not about destroying the Listeria, it's about destroying the Listeria's home. It's destroying the niche where it can survive. If you destroy the Listeria, another one comes in. I compared with the woodchucks under my house. I can hire someone to catch the woodchuck and then destroy the woodchuck, but another woodchuck comes back 2 months later. But if I destroy the ability for it to get under the house and spend a lot of money on those infrastructure improvements, hopefully the woodchuck doesn't come back. And that's the same that has to happen with seek and destroy. You have to destroy the niches. Okay. But seek and destroy in its essence is actually validation. You have a piece of equipment, you validate that your cleaning and sanitation can eliminate Listeria effectively from that piece of equipment because it doesn't have those niches. And if it does, you disassemble enough to reach them. So how do we develop a validated SSOP? Regular standardized cleaning and sanitation. Follow your SSOP, watch it, assemble the equipment, don't put product on it, disassemble to a normal daily level, test with ATP, total plate count, aerobic plate count, whatever you want to call it, to make sure all parts of it are clean and all parts of it have low microbial counts. Typically in stage 1, when someone does this for the first time, visual evaluation will already tell you that you have a problem. You say, you have your apple slice and you find a half an apple somewhere in there. Like, okay, cleaning and sanitation isn't working. There shouldn't be a half an apple somewhere deep inside my equipment. There shouldn't be cheese deep inside my equipment. Okay? After disassembling to the normal level, you disassemble completely, make sure that your procedures actually can really remove Listeria, dirt, as measured by ATP and aerobic plate counts completely. And usually the first 2-3 times you identify weaknesses in your sanitary design. You might have to change some of the design of your equipment. You may have to modify your SSOP to do further disassembly, or you may have to develop and improve your non-daily, but your more regular equipment cleaning and sanitation, what's known as PEC, periodic equipment cleaning. You know, it's a deep inside my equipment after spot where I don't get perfectly clean. Might not be able to disassemble it that completely every day, but I do it once a week. And that's my once a week periodic equipment cleaning. But you do that in-depth validation, and then you can do routine sampling to do verification. Even on a slicer or so, some of this validation like this might take you 6, 8, 10 hours because you have to do cleaning and sanitation, complete disassembly, re-put the piece of equipment back together. But that happens once a year. If something majorly changes, maybe even less frequently. But once you have that validation, then you can do your regular verification sampling. And this is, I think, where we can make a major step as industry by really thinking about validation, verification, and not about more testing. It's about why we're doing the testing. Cleaning and sanitation procedures are obviously one set of programs that would tremendously benefit from actual validation and then a targeted verification. But sanitation master schedules, preventive maintenance, supplier food safety programs, all of them would also benefit from that. Preventive maintenance, if you're a good environment monitoring program, often will tell you that your preventive maintenance might not be frequently enough, and you create niches, you know, in your gaskets after 3 months, where your preventive maintenance only calls for them to be replaced every 6 months. And what we're doing here is not reinventing something, right? And process preventive controls, the classical HACCP system, we always had validation, monitoring, verification. To date, we have not vigorously applied that system to our prerequisite programs and our non-process preventive controls. If industry moves towards that, applying the same vigor that we apply to HACCP validation verification, or we should apply to it, not everyone necessarily does, to prerequisite programs, we have a shot at further reducing Listeria recalls, Listeria cases, and negative business impacts from Listeria. So take-home messages, you know, we will continue to have Listeria issues. You'll have smaller outbreaks. Companies that feel like we are at low risk might not be at low risk anymore because of the changing in surveillance. Because of that, you need continuous improvements. The type of what I call mock swabathon, where you bring in an independent party and sample, can help you assess your program. They might find that you fooling yourself into thinking you don't have Listeria. Validation, verification, absolutely key. Root cause analysis, really, really important. Something we haven't covered yet, but maybe someone wants to ask some question. I think, whole genome sequencing and subtyping in general, tremendous impact on detecting outbreaks. I think it's time for industry to consider using those tools to identify persistence, particularly if you rarely find Listeria. If I were positive, you're not a positive 3-6 months later. It's important to know whether this Listeria is the same as it was 6 months ago, or is it a different one. Do I say you should use whole genome sequencing? I wouldn't if I ran a facility. Would I do subtyping? I would, but I would probably use other methods. There are other options out there for that. And there's a range, and it depends on where you are, what access you have, how many positive you have, and other things, which ones you use. But that's something I think also is important to have that information to better be able to manage Listeria and make sure you can control persistent Listeria, because that's the key challenge.